Like most people, you start out life not knowing exactly what you're going to do with yourself. And I grew up on a farm in Illinois, went to the University of Illinois, to the ag school. I started, and I took a general ag curriculum. I didn't know what I wanted to do, whether I was going to become a farmer or what. But I happened to have a brother who was my older brother. He's 10 years older than I was. He was in World War II, came back after World War II, and went to the University of Illinois as a graduate student. And he was there when I was an undergraduate. And he was doing a PhD in animal nutrition. And so he would ask me sometimes to come and help him in the lab and do some of this experiments and so forth that we used to do. And I kind of got interested in what he was doing. And so I changed into a more science-based curriculum, and eventually, after I finished my undergraduate degree, I started a master's at the University of Illinois as well in animal nutrition. So that's how I got into the field, because I got introduced to it because I had a little work experience with my brother, who went on to got his PhD in animal nutrition and worked in the field for many years. I got a master's in animal nutrition from Illinois, and then I went into the Air Force for a couple of years, because this was around the time of the Korean War. And then I went on to Cornell, and I went to Cornell and did my PhD in animal nutrition at Cornell. And I did this. I was working in the poultry science department at Cornell, doing work on, actually I did some of the early work on selenium as a nutrient, and I just happened to be there at the time when I was working with Milton Scott, who had been working with a man at NIH named Klaus Schwartz, and they were together trying to isolate an unidentified factor that would affect a certain nutritional disease in rats or one in chicks. And it eventually got identified as selenium. And I was part of that original discussion, and so I did my PhD thesis on selenium. And I finished at Cornell my PhD, and Cornell asked me to stay on as an assistant professor in the poultry science department, which I did. I stayed on then at Cornell, and I was in the poultry science department for about 15 years. I had worked on things like the influence of genetics on nutritional needs. I did a lot of work on amino acid metabolism, particularly arginine and lysine. I got interested in some other aspects of nutrition after I'd taken a sabbatical leave and went to the University of Cambridge in England to work in the laboratory of Kenneth Carpenter at the time, who was a professor in Cambridge. But I met a young man there who was a parasitologist, and he was interested in, his name was David Crumpton, and he was interested in parasites that lived in the intestinal tract. And I was, of course, interested in nutrition, which nutrients are absorbed through the intestinal tract. So we began talking about how the nutritional environment might affect the environment of these parasites that are growing in the intestinal tract. And we began to collaborate on some studies on the nutrition and how it affected intestinal parasitism. And I was in Cambridge twice. I was in Cambridge in 1965, and then I took another sabbatical leave in 1972. And we worked together on some of these issues. I came back to Cornell in 1973 after a year-long stay in Cambridge, and Cornell was reorganizing its nutrition department. They put together a unit that was a graduate school of nutrition at Cornell, and another unit that was in the College of Human Ecology, which was a department of human nutrition and food. It was a former home economics-based nutrition department. So the university put those two units all together into one large unit called a Division of Nutritional Sciences. And they asked me to be the director of that. And that was a human nutrition unit. So I moved my laboratory and research over to direct this new, very large unit in nutrition. And I continued my research on these nutrition and parasitic infection. And we began to work on the influence of parasites on the growth of children and some of their nutritional needs. And some of my students began working in that area. And so we did work on people with roundworm infection, and we did some work on malaria in various parts of the world. We worked in Africa and South America, and we did some work with a project in Burma. And so that's my research really kind of evolved over that period of time. So I was director of nutritional sciences at Cornell for about 14 years. And then the university asked me to become a vice president for planning at the university. So I did that for a couple of years, and then they asked me to be provost. So I was the university provost at Cornell for 6 years, and which made me have to do with dealing with the whole institution and the whole university. And so that kind of took away my nutrition work a little bit, because I had to get involved with lots of different things. So after I finished as provost, I went on for a couple of years and I retired. So I retired in 1997, so quite a long time ago. And but I continued to kind of jump back into nutrition a bit. I chaired a commission on dietary supplements it was a presidential commission that President Clinton appointed me to. I did a study. I chaired a study for the National Academy of Sciences, it's the Food Nutrition Board, and that kind of kept me in the field and busy for a while. Well, the nutrition has changed a lot over time. I mean, it's not only my interest in nutrition, but also the whole field has changed over time. I mean, I got into the field right at the time, kind of the end of the period when people were discovering what were the essential nutrients, the vitamins and minerals. Selenium was an essential nutrient. And I got into that, into the field at that particular time. Very exciting time, a lot of interesting things going on. And then the field changed more to an interest in not just individual nutrient deficiencies, but how dietary patterns affected health, how diet affected heart disease, how it affected whether there are relationships between diet and cancer, and what are some of the other relationships between diet and human health. And so I was part of the kind of changes that took place over that period of time. I was able to be involved in quite a lot of that. I was served on nutrition study sections of the NIH. I was on the Food Nutrition Board of the Institute of Medicine, and a number of various committees and so forth that people that are involved in nutrition get involved with. Well, ASN was the nutrition society that one went to. In other words, I was, if you wanted to present your work, if you wanted to interact with other people doing similar kinds of things you did, you wanted to go to the meetings of the at that time it was the American Institute of Nutrition. And so I became a member of the American Institute of Nutrition, I think probably around 1961 or 62. So I've been a member of the American Institute of Nutrition for a very long period of time. I served on a number of committees of the ASN. I was on the ASN or the AIN Council, and I was president of the society. I think it was probably 1987 or 88, something like that. I was president of the society. ASN has changed a lot over the years too, because first of all, there were two societies. There was the American Institute of Nutrition and there's American Society for Clinical Nutrition. So there were two separate societies, which are now joined in the ASN. So that's a big change. And the breadth of the field has changed a lot in terms of particularly the old American Institute of Nutrition. It was primarily an experimental group of nutrition experimentalists who did laboratory experiments, various kinds. There were not a lot of people doing population studies, epidemiology, work on nutrition education. So the AIN, and this happened about the time I was president, is that we began to broaden out the society, and we changed the annual meeting so that we encouraged people from not just the biochemists and the physiologists to come, but we encouraged other people interested in other aspects of nutrition to be part of the society. And I think that was a successful change in that the society began to grow and has grown and become quite, I think, quite successful ever since that period of time. Well, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of questions that still need to be worked on. You can see this by the number of people who are at this meeting. There's a lot of interest still in the field. We still are concerned about dietary patterns and what are their impact on health. We're interested in kind of still a lot of basic questions in metabolism and biochemistry and how they affect nutrients. The big changes, of course, in recent years have been the introduction of techniques of genetics and how some of the traits that influence our nutrition are how they're inherited, how they're passed on, how they vary from individual to individual. All of those issues are important ones. And at the same time, we still are interested in a lot of policy questions about how what is the role of government, for example, in kind of promoting appropriate food choices by individuals, and what kind of mechanisms, policy mechanisms are there. There's a lot of interest in that. Internationally, there's a huge number of people who are still not getting enough to eat. There are nutritional problems internationally. We haven't really come to grips with exactly how to deal with that yet. What are the programs and policies that work best? We're getting very fat as a nation and as a world, and we need to talk about obesity and some of the issues that are associated with that. Metabolic diseases that are caused by our dietary patterns. All those things are still things that need to be researched and considered. And so the field has moved into that, as opposed to saying, well, what's this deficiency disease and what nutrient is lacking in our diet? Nutrition has been good to me. It's been good for me. I've enjoyed my life in it, and I hope that young people coming along can find career satisfaction in the same way that I have.